by Bright Simmons, and also here is Francis Emil Schultz, former boss of the SHRAJ, Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice. And since he left, he's been contributing immensely to the discussion on how to rid this country of corruption and the grand corruption that, you know, damages the country so much. Thank you very much for joining us. Great. Now, so question we have been asking. Some have said that actually the title may be wrong of the topic may be wrong. The war. Which war is it? Some are asking. So I say the fight against corruption. Was the commitment simply to pass a law, appoint a special prosecutor, then go to sleep? So we are looking at the commitment from various angles, things that have happened, the BOST Saga, the KelniGVG Saga, the Commonwealth Games visa scam, the Ameri deal that got a minister sacked, and now the Oslo Chancery Saga, which some say is just a storm in a teacup, and the Galamsey Queen, Aisha Huang, who has been, the state decided that it was no more interested in the case and just deported her out of the country. You have heard a deputy minister suggest that there's a lot of savings from not prosecuting that case. Okay, so let me start. This is one of his pet subjects, so I'll start with him. Now, Ace. Now, Ace. So, on the front of the corruption fight, how well do you think we have done, and what are the issues that stick up, and you say you give a pass mark, or you think we have done poorly? You have been also at the forefront of the Galamsey, fight against Galamsey. So where are we?
I think that I'm not sure I'll even say it's my pet subject anymore. I think that I am losing a lot of the verve and the vim where this is concerned. And I'm beginning to say that maybe those of us who make this noise are the exception. And maybe we'll just make the noise and keep making noise, and the things remain the same, the way they are. It comes down to enforcement of the law. To me, I disagree with definitions of corruption. Look, in a manner of speaking, nepotism is a corrupt act, but the legal definition of corruption does not include nepotism. It's for the purposes of punishing for crime. And to me, corruption is a crime. Punish for it, and let's sort out the rest of the issues, right? So when people try to stretch into all of these things, that, oh, my son got a job in Kwesi's firm, it is not automatically I think that if we should segregate them. We should deal with nepotism as it is, as the law deals with it. But with the crime of corruption, we should deal with it and stop smudging and besmudging it with other things. And so all of these things come up. And from where you sit, you say, well, there appears to be sufficient ingredients of the offense for it to be charged. But nobody's ever charged. Nobody's ever tried. Well, a few get tried. And for the most part, nothing happens. Then you begin to ask, well, then maybe this is not worth your time and energy and resources. Let's just live and let's live. Look, in having nothing else to do with my time, I've concluded that one of my previous positions on the law of corruption was wrong, and I gladly admit it. When I said that private corruption is not a crime, it is. Like several of us have been looking through the act, looking for the word corrupt. And I didn't find it with respect to private people. But a couple of months back, I stumbled on one. I jumped out of my chair and the officer said, yes! It's called fraud by agents, section 145. It says, if I'm an agent for anybody, an agent is defined to include employees, and I accept an inducement, money, gift, consideration, in a way that affects the way I do my work for the principal, I've committed an offense. Yep. Interestingly, it is also a misdemeanor, but it is of that special category of misdemeanors, which includes corruption, which was lifted from being a 3-year punishment into maximum 25 in Act 30.
Right.
So this must have been deliberately drafted, called a misdemeanor, but given an enhanced punishment scheme, just like corruption and extortion and those other offences under Section 296 of Act 30. So I went to check whether there's any reported case on it. I didn't find one. Maybe it was tried in a lower court and it wasn't reported. So there is sufficient legal basis, at least now. And that is why my view of that let's pass an anti-corruption act, I'll say no and maybe. No, we have enough. Have we tested them to see that they can't stand the test of time before we say we need to spend money to pass a new act? Yes, I've advocated the act before, but I'm asking, what's the point? If we are going to pass it and it's just going to adorn our statute books, then it's not worth the money we will spend in doing all that work to pass it. Let's look at what is there. Then going forward, you would realize that other corrupt acts, there are other statutes that punish for corruption but impose lesser sentences. Corruption under the Criminal Offences Act, although it's a misdemeanor, corruption of a voter should take you to jail for up to 25 years. Then we pass the Representation of the People, Act, and pass Referendum Act and others, which impose a lesser sentence for corrupting a voter. So if the later statute is deemed to have amended the previous statute, we have actually lowered the punishment threshold for election-related corruption. And so if we are going to clean it up, I think these are the statutes we need to clean up to bring them in line with the 1960 law, which I think is up to the point. But look, the people to trigger the trial for corruption are the people who might stand in fear of corruption charges being brought against them next time if they are not in power. And I'm gradually resigned to the fact that the energy to put it out is not there. And also because, you know, it's a crime and it's proved beyond reasonable doubt. So you need to have your ducks really lined up. I'm saying a lot of ducks today, right? You need to have your ducks really lined up before you launch a prosecution.
We have passed a very good law. You applaud Special Prosecutors Law. We have appointed a no-nonsense man.
The problem with the OSP Act is that we failed or refused or neglected to manage expectations. So it was so touted that many Ghanaians believed that once the act was passed and the appointment was made, prosecutions will start. But if I don't know anything at all, I know quite a bit about these things. This is not just a prosecution's office, although we call it special prosecutor. It's an investigative office. So for the Attorney General as prosecutor, the investigation is done by the police and brought to the Attorney General as a docket. In this instance, he has the power to initiate his own investigations. And so we created an office which blended the Ministry of Interior and the Attorney General, the prosecution, because the office investigates. Now, investigations are done by paid people with the wherewithal to do the investigation. And it's not just police investigation. If you are going to go into white-collar crime, you need auditors, lawyers who have knowledge of the field, forensic people who can look into the accounts and say, this is where the bodies are buried.
Right.
How many of them have we appointed? So actually, we expected Mr. Martinamidu on his own to be a lawyer, an auditor, a finance expert, everything all in one. He and his deputy rolled in one in that 3-bedroom apartment they've been using so far as the office and come up with prosecutions. They are going to fail. And there's something about prosecutions, Samson. If you start one and you fail, you lose your mojo. You may lose steam because Ghanaians will say, we spent all of that money on you. Your first case, you lost it. For Ghana, every case is win or lose. So we should manage expectations. We have to appoint a board. We have to pass the LI, which will oil the day-to-day mechanics of the running. So we should have said, Ghanaians, yes, we'll do this, but let's give ourselves a year or two for us to make the appointments, for the people to find their feet, and for the work to start. I am aware that there's a lot of investigation going on. Maybe a case has not been filed yet. And I think it's also not Mr. Hamidu's style now to come to the public with what he's doing. He's just doing his work, right? But you can see the frustrations. You know, the frustration that he wants things to move quickly, but the wherewithal, the there isn't there. But let me say something. And I don't think that that's what the government is doing. But it is very possible for a government, maybe if I'm in power, I don't like the OSP to work, to just keep it not getting funds. Its first real budget came out this year. And another thing that Ghanaians, we need to understand about budget. Budget doesn't mean the money is sitting there.
Right.
Budget means that the budget imposes a limit on how much we can spend on your office. So you are not going to get the 100%. I'm not sure it ever happens. So you give us 180 something
180
million. It doesn't mean there's 180 million citizens sitting there and the check will be written to him tomorrow. It's a budget.
You won't get it.
Yeah, he knows better than I do. You won't get it. So let's manage our expectations. I think the problem is not with the office, it's not with well, there are issues about it. But it's managing our expectations. I have confidence that the office will deliver. Who knows, they probably are investigating me. But and as time goes on, things will evolve. But we need to give that office time. They need to appoint people. They need to go into the matters, ascertain that indeed there's evidence to start a trial. Before you go to trial and get your witnesses contradicting themselves and contradicting your case.
Okay.
Then you know that
so I'll go around and come to you and raise some specific issues and find out what you have to say about them. But maybe start on this one before I leave you. You know, first, this Galamsey Queen was arrested, and the charges, you didn't find them to be solid enough. So you made noise, and then you got the charges enhanced against her. Suddenly, the Attorney General says, Ghana is not interested in prosecuting you. We deport you, end of story. Does that in any way do anything to the fight?
Like I said, right now I look at Ghana and my emoji is a heartbreak, and I look at Ghana with a shrug. Because when the arrest was first happened, the charges were administrative charges, which led to administrative fines. So in fact, there was no real jurisdiction in the court itself, because the administrative fines that or some of them, that the immigration could have imposed. Occupy Ghana wrote a petition that if the person has been caught engaged in illegal mining, because mining is not for, small-scale mining is not for non-Ghanaians, and is specifically criminalized, and so why is she not being charged with it? And the Attorney General responded, and they amended the charge sheet and laid the proper charges. And then one day, there's a nolli prosequi, and she's flown out. Well, with my knowledge, I understand. If the Minister for Interior determines that the presence of a person in Ghana is not conducive for the things listed in the law, the fact that the person is facing trial does not mean that the Minister for Interior cannot arrange the deportation of the person anyway.
Right.
But here, the deportation, I understand, was preceded by a nolli prosequi. It's within the power of the Attorney General to do it. Does it make me happy? No. But who am I? The critical issue for me and for civil society should be this. Attorney General, why did you file the nolli prosequi? Now, I am not one who believes that nolli prosequi is unquestionable. That was pre-1992. Every statutory or legal discretion is questionable under the Constitution. Article 296 does that. And that is why I praise the Attorney General, who filed a nolli prosequi in a public matter and then issued a statement saying, these are the reasons why we decided that we can't prosecute this matter
That's
anymore.
in the KKD matter.
And so I expect that for a matter like this, with sufficient public interest, because we are arresting Ghanaian Galamsey people, taking them to court, and they are being fined. But we arrest this one, who is supposed to be a queen, I don't have any evidence, and then the person is shipped out of the country, so that the Ghanaian gets punished, and the foreigner gets shipped out to go back to his or her home in her country. It's not as if we even tried, sentenced her, and repatriated her to serve the sentence in her country. So she's not guilty of any offense, even if, assuming she had committed one. So there must be some real reasons why, maybe the Attorney General didn't find sufficient evidence to prosecute.
But you are also told that, I mean, financially, it is wise to have, deported her instead of trying her to the end. And that Ghana has been saved money.
I promised my family I'll be a good boy today. Don't push me. That's rubbish.
Yeah, that's total.
That's rubbish. That is insulting to the people of Ghana to tell us that because of the cost of prosecution. What's the cost of prosecution? Has he told us how much each prosecution costs? These are state officials. They are paid at the end of the month. What extra money goes to prosecution? Is it the fact that she was arrested, engaged in mining activities that is banned by law? How much has it cost us to prosecute the Ghanaians that we take there and are fined and whatever for engaging in illegal mining? And you tell us that when it comes to this one, it's such a special case. Did he tell us how much money that was going to cost? I think that people who are appointed to political office should understand that the rest of us are not dummies because we are not in political office. So don't speak to us as if we have no brains in our heads to tell us that by deporting her, you saved us the cost of prosecution. That's an insult to Ghanaian. That's an insult to himself. That's an insult to the people who appointed him.
But Ace, you don't also want to ignore the fact that there is a positive use of nolli prosequi. That power to say for the state to say, I'm not interested any longer in prosecuting, could be used for a greater benefit.
I can't say that. I mean, everybody. I mean,
including that she may have led us to find many more and even bigger fishes.
To tell us.
And for some diplomatic reasons also, you know, relationships we want to keep.
I'm not that, I can understand that. But if that is what you're doing, you may decide that there are some things you will not tell us. It cannot be that the entire matter cannot be told, right? So at least the exercise of your discretionary power ought to be fair. And there's the word the Constitution uses, candid.
Candid.
Candid means full and valid disclosure. To the extent that you can disclose it, go ahead and tell us about it. But there's absolute silence. Now what impression do you give to Ghanaians?
Okay.
That we may go to court and be jailed, but due to the color of the person's skin and nationality, they're superior. There's a nice noli prosequi, and the person goes. So I don't challenge noli prosequi. It is sensible. It is required. It's the law. But if you use it under these circumstances, at the very least, tell us why you've done it. But absolute silence, done. End of story.
Okay.
You know, these are the things that...
Then let's hope that... let's hope that Gloria
Kofu
Kofu will respond to the petition about the need for the disclosure
the media coalition as far as
by the media coalition against Galamsey. Now, before we hear from, you know, Justice Emil Short, Professor H. Prempeh also likes to talk about this subject a lot. So, for you, what do you see? Do you see a government simply just giving us a law and a special prosecutor and saying, that's all we want, we can do, end of story?
It appears so. I mean, when you look at, and I agree with Ace that, yes, corruption is a crime. But I think that if to fight it, you have to take yourself sometimes out of the legal box, right? Because when you put yourself in that legal box, it means that essentially you've outsourced corruption to the prosecutor, right? So all along the corruption, so-called corruption value chain, right? Nothing happens until, you know, a crime has been committed and you give it to the investigator and the prosecutor and you wash your hands off. And I think it appears that that is where we are, where we have put ourselves in a legal box. The corruption is about a crime. You have to adduce evidence, and you know, you have to take a person to court. So, Mr. Prosecutor, here is your job. You do it. But it's not just a crime. It's a crime of opportunity. I like to call corruption a crime of opportunity, which means that corruption actually festers when you have ample opportunity for corruption. And so, while the prosecutor can deal with the crime, the part of the opportunity falls within, you know, the purview of government, of businesses and others, right? So what are we doing to minimize the opportunities for corruption in the system? In our previous discussion, we talked about party financing and campaign financing. A lot of people enter public office with a motive of, you know, recouping my investment from my campaign, a motive of, you know, acquiring a few properties here and there. So as for motive, it's ubiquitous all over the place. Where we can get some action and some mileage dealing with corruption, in my view, is the opportunity side, right? Because for any crime to happen at all, you have to have a person with motive who finds an opportunity and then boom, and takes advantage of it. So my point about the opportunity side is that that is the part where I think government must be held responsible, because there are so many opportunities in the system. And as far as that goes, nothing has changed significantly. It's mostly business as usual. We continue to see the practices that are vulnerable to corruption continuing to be engaged in. We continue to see sole sourcing. We continue to see this very bad practice of policy coupling with contracting. You know, it's almost as if we cannot decouple a policy from a contract. Almost every policy, good policy proposal comes already with a contractor in tow and a contract signed. And so it makes it even difficult for you to analyze the policy on its own merits and its own terms. It's as if it must always come with a contractor. And so these practices are the ones that create opportunities for corruption. Too much discretion, lack of transparency. We just talked about this noli prosequi issue without any statement of reasons why it was done. So it raises all these questions, just excessive discretion in the system. These are things that government can do. This doesn't require a prosecutor. And we expect on the government side that they must do more to close these loopholes, these opportunities for corruption. We've talked about value for money. In fact, at CDD, we just came to a decision that, look, whenever you make an accusation of corruption, you are met with this legalistic response, where's the evidence? And it's a very convenient response because those making that challenge for you to produce the evidence know that you do not have the evidence.
Right.
You do not have access to the evidence. Right? They know that corruption is something that usually takes place in the dark.
So you have changed the rhetoric.
So,
and you say, let's look at it from this other perspective.
Value for money.
Right.
So that it doesn't appear accusatory. Let's look at value for money. And for us, something that fails the value for money test, usually would fail the waste test. It will fail the corruption test. So why not? We're not trying to accuse anybody so that you come back and say, where's the evidence? Just make sure that what you are dealing in, the transaction the public transaction you are entering into, passes the value for money test.
Okay.
And even that basic one, when you go from accusing someone of corruption to value for money, you still hit a blank because they won't provide you with the evidence. They won't provide you with the evidence you need to make a value for money assessment. So it appears that really this has been outsourced to Mr. Amidu, and they just wash their hands off.
Right.
And that cannot be how we fight corruption.
So in this, just as I did for ACE, I play up this one example to see how you feel about it. The Commonwealth Games came, and then about 60 persons were arrested in Australia. Out of that number, at least 50 of them who claimed to be journalists were repatriated for bearing false identities. It was such a huge national embarrassment that the president felt the need to ask certain people to step aside, including the Deputy Minister for Sports and the chairperson of the board of the National Sports Authority. We were told that there were investigations going on by the police, independent. We haven't heard anything about the investigations except the president decide to reinstate the people that he took action against, and we are clueless what exactly has happened. It is as if the Australian authorities were telling a lie, and we know that is not a lie. That some 50 names or more found themselves as Ghana's team, onto Ghana's team or list, which were fraudulently done. How do you feel about that?
That one is an easy example. I mean,
what should happen?
Well, I think it's again, one of the things that I have been rather disappointed with is somehow that the president takes. I mean, he just takes it upon himself. I think he puts his own reputation on the line too much, too often, for persons in his administration who come under suspicion or allegation of corruption. And I'm somewhat a bit surprised that, he would do that, because it's basically, you cannot be privy to every transaction that takes place in the office of any one of your appointees. Sure, not every allegation of corruption probably would stand up to the, to scrutiny if you subject it to scrutiny. But I think this tendency of the president clearing his ministers or appointees of corruption and pushing back against allegations made not against him but against his appointees is a bit worrisome, because it prejudices, if there is any investigation at all, it prejudices the investigation. If any other prosecutor, special prosecutor, EOCO could have done it, they no longer feel they have the political, green light to proceed. And so that kind of practice and tendency of the president every so often pushing back against allegations made or suspicions raised about certain corrupt practices his appointees may have engaged in, is really not helpful to the fight. So I haven't really taken a very keen interest in this particular matter that you have just described.
The Director of Communications at the Presidency informed us that the report of the inquiry into the allegations, which was submitted to the President on the 6th of July 2018, contained no adverse findings against these persons. End of story.
Yeah, but what kind of a committee was that? I mean, who appointed the committee? I mean, some of these things.
It was the police that did the investigations.
Well, that's unfortunately the system we.
And the police finished their report and submitted to the President.
That's unfortunately the system that we are burdened with. You know, where there is so much discretion, there's so much opacity in the way the business of government is done. You know, I've heard recently, in light of these experiences, calls being made for some, you know, protection of police investigation from political kind of control or micromanaging. And in fact, it's important. I mean, in Kenya, for example, their new constitution allows the Director of Public Prosecution, which is actually a constitutional office. Under that constitution, you cannot, no politician can instruct a Director of Public Prosecution. The Director alone can instruct the Inspector General of Police to commence investigation and issue a report to the Director of Public Prosecution directly, right? The President is not allowed, no minister, no politician is allowed to instruct the Inspector General on a particular case. They can make policy instructions which must be in writing and recorded and documented, but you cannot instruct the IGP or the Director of Public Prosecutions on any matter pertaining to a particular case. I think a framework like that, a regime like that, would help us, because when you have this system where, you know, the police is beholden to the executive, and they are instructed to do investigation quietly, and the executive comes and says, oh, a report has been submitted, but by the way, I'm not going to show you a report. I don't have a duty. And we are operating a system where if the law doesn't mandate it, if the law doesn't enjoin you to do it, our political class is taking the position, as long as we are permitted to keep it to ourselves, we will keep it to ourselves. Okay. So they're operating a very minimalist view of the Constitution or of their duty. You don't have to see anything.
Conveniently so.
Yeah, I mean, and these are really, unfortunately, the kind of the inbuilt permissiveness within our system and discretion that we've talked about, which really is not helpful to the fight against corruption.
Justice Short, do you share the view by, you know, Professor H.K.C. Prempeh that it is almost as if it's business as usual? You were upbeat about the setting up the law for the special prosecutor and setting up of the office, and so has anything changed from your optimism from the start of these processes that you advocated and were happy about?
I think the appointment of the special prosecutor and the establishment of the office must be put in proper perspective.
Okay.
We have a situation where corruption is pervasive, it's endemic in our country. I don't think we are fighting, we're just dancing around the problem.
Really?
Yes, there's no fight. There are, you know, I mean, I appreciate the work that is being done by
the commitment to set up such an office.
No, I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the OSP.
Okay.
I have great expectations from Mr. Martin Amido.
Okay.
When he starts functioning, you know, and I agree with Ace that we haven't managed the expectations properly. It's a new office. You have to set up a new office. I mean, when I had to set up from scratch, it took a lot of time, you know, because you have to get the right premises, you have to get the right staff, you have to interview people and so on, and put everything in place, you know, administrative procedures and so on. So I think that you must suspend judgment until he starts working. I'm sure he's investigating some cases,
right?
You know, and as Ace also mentioned, he has to make sure that the first few cases that he investigates, you know, there is solid evidence, and he has to make sure that he has a conviction. So I have great expectations for him. He's somebody who has a great track record in terms of fighting corruption, and also his integrity and his experience as a Deputy Attorney General and Attorney General. So I don't think he's going to put his reputation on the line. I feel that, you know, he's going to make an impact when he starts. But it's important to understand that, you know, in corruption, the adage that prevention is better than cure is very, very appropriate. And so the investigation and prosecution is just a part of the fight, if you call it a fight, against corruption. We have, in a situation where corruption is so pervasive and so endemic, you need a lot of education to change the mindset of the people, you know, to try and deal with the systemic corruption that we find in the system. I mean, I get sometimes I get to talk to a lot of people, you know. Somebody comes to me and says that, oh, I provide services for government, and I've given them my invoice. I've stated my materials, my labor, and so on. And then somebody from the office comes and says, please change the figure, you know. And they give her a specific figure to put. Inflate the contract price. This is going on, and she tells me that if she doesn't, she loses the job, you know. And she tells me that this is standard practice. You understand? We have so many instances of corruption in almost permeating almost every sector, you know. The ghost names keep coming up. You know, recently, about a few weeks ago, front page.
We never finished removing them.
We never finish removing them. And the sad part of it is we never hold accountable those who were facilitating the ghost names. I mean, it's not as if nobody was receiving the monies.
Right.
You know. But all you see is that 1,000 names have been removed from the public payroll. The question is, what happened to those who were receiving the monies and those who facilitated the receipt of the monies? People at the top, you know. But no, you don't hear anything about that. And so we have developed a culture of lack of accountability and impunity, you know. And that is where I think, you know, Martin Amedu might make a difference in the terms of, you know, because investigation and prosecution and then jailing people serves as a deterrent, you know. But then I think, you know, prevention measures are probably more important than investigation and prosecution, you know. And if you look at the National Anti-Corruption Plan, you know, which is based on 3 planks: massive public education on the evil and cost of corruption, you know, and that entails a whole host of activities, you know, starting from the schools, changing the mindset of the people, the youth, and so on and so forth. Then you have the prevention dimension, having proper anti-corruption legislation like the Right to Information Bill, you know, the Conduct of Public Officers Bill 2013 that has been hanging there for so long. Nobody seems willing to pass it. And that deals with conflict of interest, it deals with gifts and so on.
That's so.
These are important, you know, pieces of legislation which the Parliament seems to always be dragging its feet on this anti-corruption legislation. Now, Ace was talking also about what constitutes corruption under our law. We have ratified United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and we have the African Convention on Fighting Corruption. These conventions have a much wider definition of corruption, which includes illicit enrichment, abuse of office, nepotism, and so on. You see, we have...
Are they self-executing on
No.
No. We have to domesticate them.
We have to domesticate
We have to pass legislation, to incorporate those definitions into our domestic law. But we are fond of ratifying these conventions, but when it comes to domesticating them, we drag our feet, So these are important. But what I'm saying is that when you look at the pervasive nature of corruption, and you don't see that much is being done to really tackle the menace of corruption in an aggressive manner, and you talk about the attitude of government sometimes in not disclosing. Let's take the visa fraud, for example. It's a matter of public interest. I think that it would inure to the benefit of government if they release the report or they give a reason why the Deputy Minister for Sports has been exonerated, or tell us exactly why the reasons in the investigative report why the Deputy Minister was found not to have been guilty. But apart from that, who facilitated the visas for these 50 people who went there and posed as journalists when they are not? Right. There's so many questions which are unanswered. And you see, when you don't release the report, you are fueling speculation. People will think that you have ulterior motives, for not releasing the report. So I think that it's in the interest of government to realign its approach to fighting corruption. That's why I've always advocated that, just as government have an economic team, they should have a governance team also with a focus on anti-corruption. And that team should be liaising with the economic team and also be in the forefront of implementing the National Anti-Corruption Plan, which is a fairly good blueprint for the fight against corruption. There's so much in that document, But its implementation has been rather lackadaisical. Shraj has the responsibility of reporting on its implementation. But I think in a sense, I think that the government needs to, if it had a governance, in the previous government had, for example, Daniel Batidam, who was advising government as to how he performed is another matter. But there is the need for government to have people who have expertise in anti-corruption, to be part of its team so that it can advise on, procedures and practices which should be adopted, which would enhance the image of government in terms of how it is fighting corruption. That it hasn't done. And I think that there is a lot that the government has failed to do, even though I believe that the president himself is sincere about fighting corruption. I think the fact that he appointed Martin Amidu is to his credit, because he's somebody who is he has a fearless reputation about fighting corruption, and also, the NDC people who are not too happy about his appointing him. But I think that was an indication that he's serious about the fight against corruption, so far as investigation is concerned. But we wait to see how the OSP functions, because there are quite a number of challenges. Namely, it has to have the right supporting staff. He has to have his own investigators. These investigators must share his vision. He has to have, as he says, auditors and other people who are going to help in the in his investigation. As to whether he's going to be able to act independently, that remains to be seen. And by that I mean whether the Attorney General, the President, is going to lean heavily on him when it comes to initiating investigations against certain people, who are related to government, and also whether the AU will ever file a nolle prosequi against any action that is instituted by by the special prosecutor. These are matters that will unfold. But I have confidence in him, and I have great expectation. But I think that the point I made earlier is that it has to be put in proper perspective that it is not a solution to the fight against corruption.
Okay.
It's a critical and important part of the fight. But let's focus, let's find ways of removing the perception now that corruption is the norm, which most people will see it as they don't have any sense of guilt about it, and it's very pervasive in our society. And also let's focus on the preventive, initiatives like what the government did with the paperless
Port system.
Okay. These are initiatives that should be replicated in other institutions. Using technology. Reduce the person-to-person contact between, the officials and the public. So you cut out all the middlemen and women, and also, those are important strategies in the fight against corruption. This is why I say that if the government had a governance team that could give it advice on the fight against corruption, it will help a lot.
All right. Okay. So let's listen to Bright, and then after that we'll take a break and return for the final leg of the discussion on corruption. And Bright, I just opened one of the many Occupy Ghana, demands, and this was request for the report of the ministerial committee that investigated all sales of allegedly contaminated products by BOST, the Bulk Oil Storage and Transportation Company Limited. The matter came up that, contaminated fuel worth how much, 40.5 million, had gone through some very, questionable situation. We know that someone who has that entity lost his job, and tied to that, we know the Ameri matter too that came up, and Boache Jaco also lost his job. Now, here was Occupy Ghana. I don't know if they had answers to the request they made. They asked, among other things, who purchased and imported the product into Ghana and from whom, how much was paid for it, who was in charge of holding or storing the product until it was sold or otherwise disposed of, under what circumstances and under whose control did the product become contaminated, quote unquote, exactly how did the contamination happen, exactly when did the contamination happen, and or when it was discovered. Was the product contaminated through negligence, criminal activity, or any other illegal or wrongful act, and if so, who was responsible for it? So you see, they're asking questions that will lead to some full disclosure, and beyond the disclosure, establish the clear lines of liability and responsibility. Then they ask question about were there any remedial measures that could have been taken to, quote, uncontaminate or purify the product apart from selling it in the contaminated state, and if so, were those measures feasible? Mitigation. 9, they say, did BOSS obtain the technical report that is mandatory requirement for disposal of property under the Public Procurement Act specific sections, and so on and so on and so forth. So, of course, I know they didn't get any response. Right.
We have to go to court for the answers.
Right.
and we can't find the money, so we won't go.
Okay, right. So this, and you have had others also ask to know the specific reasons behind Boache Jaco's predicaments. Okay. So it does appear that some actions have been taken intended to fight the corruption, but there's no, as it were, sunshine. We are not being informed. How does that, as it were, plague the process and make the government not look good?
Samson,
in the fight.
The problems of underdevelopment are cross-cutting. And a country that cannot do land zoning properly or sanitation properly can't be expected to fight corruption properly.
Hey.
So this is not that complicated. Underdevelopment is a cross-cutting problem. So the way that I approach this is to say, let's look at it fundamentally. Over the last couple of years, and I'll give you a short history, the way that I understand it, perhaps that will help. The last couple of years, there's been a growing spirit of laxity in this country, and somehow some type of general analysis fatigue, where any attempt to try and unravel government policy is treated as a political attack, and the government forces them mobilize. And they've succeeded in converting the public sphere into an NDC, MPP, angry people throwing projectiles at each other, and everybody that attempts, to bring some light to bear on these matters is seen as caught in the crossfire. And so what's your problem? It's very good that former Commissioner Short is here, because as far as I'm concerned, all these things that we are discussing, there's an interesting history to it. And it has been alluded to in this discussion already, which is that centering a lot of these issues that you've raised under the corruption rubric itself is problematic. In 1996, some people complained, I think it was the former editor of the Chronicle, Kofi Kumsen, and I'm not sure if there were other complainants, about a number of government officials. I don't know if you remember that case, the Jemafo, Ibrahim Adams, whatever case. Yeah. What was interesting was that there were about three things that are interesting. But the most relevant point is that somebody also, I think whether it's in the same complaint or another complaint, supplementary complaint, raised issues about GMPC and how much money GMPC had purportedly wasted or allegedly wasted. And it was quite clear even then that there was a clear difference in the way that our systems are set up to deal with corruption versus mismanagement. And I remember Commissioner Snott writing to them to say that, look, our mechanisms don't provide as much power to handle mismanagement. And the reason why that is important is this. To the extent that almost all these so-called corruption scandals that blow up, when you look at them very carefully, reveal more about general mismanagement, about general dysfunction, about general inattention to detail, about the complete incapacity to focus on, basic administrative hygiene. Whenever you look at these things closely, that is what is exposed. To the extent that that is true, my view is that we need a cultural change much deeper than legal reform, much deeper than administrative changes to fix this. And I see this because I spent my time on social media beyond the activism that happens in the proper public sphere, so to speak. I also spend a lot of time informally in social media trying to understand how the mindset currently operates in Ghana in respect to these issues. And what I recognized was that every attempt to break things down, to try and explain things, to say, look, this could have been done much better, runs into this whole wall of complete opposition to analysis. And it makes it very difficult to improve standards in public life.
Call it power is knowledge.
Yes, it makes it very, and it's not just the powerful. It is also a whole group of people in Ghana who somehow feel that their destiny is bound with a political party, right, or that there's a certain culture of how we do things in Ghana, and sometimes that's even more pervasive than the partisan rancor. That's right. We do things in a certain way in Ghana, and if you are somehow not able to accommodate, then you have the problem. Every time policy is mismanaged, avenues for corruption are created, which is the point that Professor Prempeh was making. Take the issue of national lotteries management in this country. In 1996, the government went to court to force private lotto operators not to use government data and national lotteries data to run their business. In a decade, systematic efforts were made to dismantle private lotteries. Then we hear a decade onwards, after that had been done, and as our original PO and the rest, you know what happened to them? In 2010, the National Lotteries Authority went to court, garnished their property to pay staff that had back pay because of the fact that they were forced into insolvency. In a country where even the government can owe workers for years sometimes. After they dismantled all the six major lotto operators and imposed a government monopoly on the sector, what do we hear now? 2 years ago, in the National Lotteries Authority, they outsourced a major aspect of their function. A company called Lot Services was giving huge amount of money to perform these same services. That private sector operators were performing at better, in my mind, because they were employing more people in lotteries in Ghana and the rest of it, and trying to use government data to do some of these things. Eventually, they outsourced it, but now they control the contracting. Eventually, it came out that a principal of the company that had won this contract had given a loan to the Director General. When he was confronted, he said, oh, that nothing whatsoever to do with any business he had to do with the organization, because he already had a contract with the organization. So this could not have been a reward or anything. And then the man had actually approached him because he had the man on the phone call talking about a loan. I mean, what is this? But what is important to recognize is the fact that the bad policy of systematically dismantling lotteries, then using government power to impose a monopoly arrangement for a private provider, had not created a mechanism for people to enrich themselves. That's the bad truth. Eventually, digital lotteries became rampant. And we have sports betting all over the place, happening by mobile phone and the rest. And now, National Lotteries itself is on the knees. Latest budget, we intend to reform National Lotteries. Who is asking fundamental questions about the structure of the policy making itself that has led us to this mess? Go and try and publish something today and go and see the way people will react on radio and publish. Who are you? You think you know everything. And that problem, I think, is fundamental. Too known. There is a sense that everything is about innuendo. So you cannot genuinely look at government policy like KelniGVG or BOST or any of these things and say, look, your systems are a mess. And every time I look at government policies in this country, I wish in retrospect that I had not. Because it's unbelievable, some of the things that you see. Why? Because there is no incentive for attention to detail. They have mobilized public opinion to convince people that every government action, every act by a political actor or a public sector actor is somewhat motivated by public interest by default. Right. So we shouldn't even query it. We shouldn't ask why. We shouldn't ask where's the memo. And I can give you a plethora of these instances, and I'm not sure if you have the time, but for specific issues that have come up, whether it's the drone delivery program and the rest of it, the issue should not be that we rush towards looking for corruption. Why? Because white-collar crime is extremely difficult to prosecute. The second outcome of the the Jamal Ford, Ibrahim Adams, and the rest, that case that happened in 1996, the second outcome of it was this. Public sector officials now began a process of Darwinian transformation. The smartest survived. So in those days, somebody having a house in the name of a relative overseas was enough to get Shrat to grill them for years. And some of them eventually had to lose their positions. The most powerful man in government, P.V. Obeng, was forced out under disgrace. Simply because he had a property here and there, and then, there were concerns around it. In the same country that a decade and 2 decades after, we are talking of millions of dollars being siphoned off from public contracts. People lost their jobs because they couldn't clearly explain why somebody else's name was on their property, and there was a few issues with their asset declaration forms and the rest. Nobody in Ghana today would even be smacked that for those things that happened in 1996. And that tells you how far we've sunk. And the reason for that is very simple. When we raised the bar that high, people became smarter, and they started to do two things. One is obviously that they shifted all of these things to kickbacks, which are very hard to prove. It's almost impossible to prove a kickback. Now, the second thing they did is they began to mobilize public opinion by spending massive resources in building armies of so-called communicators and affiliates whose job is to create a culture of impunity for power. It's a culture of impunity for power. Don't try. Go and publish something and say, oh, I look at this and analyze this, and this is 10% cheaper, and therefore why are you 10% cheaper? So are you wiser than the person who did it? Which how many PhDs you have?
You have all kinds of terms now. New experts.
New experts. whatever. Why? I mean, what is your problem if somebody in the public sector, in the civil society space, wants to share more analysis to prove that some policy is ineffective or the other. If you want to share some, let's all have a good discussion.
That's right.
Now, you can't even do that in the public sphere. So you know what has happened? So many people who used to contribute ideas, who used to, the people that used to do inflation analysis and to check whether inflation policy was working and the rest, where are they? Have you asked yourself? Why is that we don't have the benefit of their insights in public debate anymore? Because it doesn't work. Now, there are people that are motivated. Look, there's rational ignorance. None of us here can purport to know anything about something that we have not spent time working on, and we have limited time. So rational ignorance is very understandable. But what we are seeing now is militant ignorance. It's we shall impose ignorance on the public, and if you dare interfere, you'll be lynched. There is mob lynching against anyone that purports to force government to confront ineffective policy making, and I think that's at the root of it. Whether it's Kelni, whether it's drones, we had the Director General of the Ghana Health Service sit on radio to say that we are going to set up a distribution center in Suhum because there are people in Afram Plains who cannot access essential medicines. Unaware that the air distance from Suhum to that place is about 140 kilometers or thereabouts, and the drone range is 80 kilometers. He clearly has not even read his own documents. No, serious. Now, when that happens, and then you try and take him on or try and force people to say, look, let's look at this a bit more closely. You can't have a situation where it costs $20 to deliver some medicines, because a lot of the essential medicines like antiserum and the rest, they don't even cost $20. So if you're adding an additional $20 to deliver them, there's a challenge. There's nothing wrong with having a debate. Somebody will say, yeah, but the weight to whatever ratio might mean, therefore, that you can send a lot more at a time. He says, no, you can't send a lot more at a time because it's demand driven. So if I need 2 serum bottles, I need 2 serum bottles now. Send a drone. Whether those 2 serum bottles cost $5 or not, send a drone at $20 to deliver it to me. That's a problem. That somebody has now said to think, maybe we have to adjust this a little bit. Maybe we have to redesign the inventory system. You can't have a system where we have a situation where a lot of medicines are paid for in the facility, and yes, you have a drone management system which has no payment and inventory integration. So when I need it, I order for it, and there's no clarity in terms of how the payment will eventually be sorted out. Or a situation where you have a biomedical engineering unit, which this country spends $11,000 on every year, in the most clinical genetics institute, which this country doesn't spend more than $30,000 on every year, in the 2 most rapidly advancing fields of health research, and yet you want to spend $4 million to a Silicon Valley startup to improve its IP, which it carries back away. When you ask, is there a technology transfer agreement? You are asked specifically, is there a technology transfer clause? It's yes. Why? Because they train operators. Is that a technology transfer clause? To train operators to shoot catapults? No, and when you say that, they say you must have a specific problem against somebody, or you're arrogant, or you don't like a particular government. It has nothing to do with that. It's just that to raise standards in public life, we must be eager to continue to refine public policy by saying this is better, this is not good enough, add this to it, etc., etc. But if you disincentivize that activity and create a spirit of laxity, a certain, I don't even know what to say. You create a situation where it makes it very, very unfruitful and unthankful for people to want to share ideas and to improve things, because you'll be perceived as either arrogant or antagonistic. Then you create this kind of society where men's goals strive. Because during the men's goals problem, a lot was written to show that even if you took everything away and just left it the business models they have explained, it doesn't work.
I remember Imani even writing about that as
well.
In
great detail. That take everything away. Forget that, Ponzi and all of things, because these things, make people, but just focus on the business model itself. Why? Because they purport to be leveraging increases in the price of gold. But because they are borrowing the gold, you must actually see gold prices fall to make money. Because at every point, 3 months now, I'll come for my gold. So if the price of gold has risen, you have to go and buy the price of gold at a higher price and give to me. And therefore, the only way their model works is if gold price were falling. But you go to their website, they say, oh, because gold prices are rising, we make a profit and we share with you. You don't make a profit and share with you because I'm lending you my gold to go and trade. So unless the price of the gold is going to fall for you to buy back at a discount, you're losing money every time you trade. This is something that somebody ought to sit there and say, then regardless of whether regulation and the rest of it, and there's something wrong. Right. In the financial press itself, you attempt that somebody will say, you think you are too, why don't you have a private jet? If you are wise and know how the price of gold and things work, go and do it yourself. You see, and I think that culture is going to do us in. That culture is going to do us in.
No, but I'm surprised why you would suggest that this has led to disincentivize some people and other entities that used to be, head on these matters. Because the last time I checked, Imani, for example, has not been, because of this, has not, you know, as it were, stopped its advocacy.
But at what cost?
CDD has not stopped its advocacy.
But at what cost?
Occupy Ghana and Ace Nkrumah as an individual has not stopped the advocacy.
I assure you there's a
They have
degree
not
of
become
self-censorship.
tied.
I assure you there's a degree of self-censorship. That you wait till the thing is so bad that clearly those that don't like Imani get really trampled upon. Those that feel that, you know, as soon as there is something about, I must say that, you know, you can add this to it. They are the most hated. So the rest of them just wait till the thing is really very bad, then they get involved. Because if you say, look, I like what you, let me tell you the problem. The problem is that we have a few that somehow either you are for something or you are against something. So you cannot say that, look, you want to spend $4 million a year or a minimum on something.
Professor Kwesi Prempeh has for a long time been talking about how we appear to be naturally tuned to this binary discourse.
There's a binary thinking.
It is either A or B. End of story.
End of story. You can't say that, look, $4.something million if you deliver 100 items a year. Because the contract is a capacity charge contract. It's not a delivery contract. So the notion that if we don't deliver, they can bring their drones and say their ID makes no sense. It's a capacity charge contract. So they say if they do 100 deliveries a day, you pay them their $4 million a year, minimum.
If they do 0, you pay.
You pay.
That's it.
Now, somebody can say, look, given that context and given the cost per charge and all of those things, it costs more under this scheme to send a package from Suhum to Donkokru than it costs to send a package from Accra to Frankfurt of the same weight. So if somebody says because of that, maybe let's adjust the modeling a little bit. Let's look at some modeling to see where we actually do the sighting. Instead of Suhum, maybe they could be somewhere better, maybe Begro or something. Give room. Say, let's do the analysis together. Open it up. Write your own memo to say, here is our analysis why we chose Suhum and etc. etc. We did a spatial analysis distribution. We found out that the 80-kilometer radius there, that is the most intense, and here the dynamics and everything. Try that in Ghana and see.
But you say,
so what people are doing is that they wait till the thing is really bad, then they all jump in, which is why we all wait for people to literally steal money. So you have an Oslo issue until somebody can prove that somebody has someone stolen money. There is no scandal.
That's right.
And that is the problem. So anybody else attacking the Oslo thing tries to make it a corruption case.
Right.
When the issue is very much that you are borrowing $50 million at 8-point-something% to build embassies around the world, should Oslo take $60 million, regardless of whether there is corruption or not. It's also that strategic that if you are going to borrow $50 million at 8%, as much as 30% of all the resources being raised on such an expensive loan should go to Norway. Is it that such a strategic foreign policy output for us?
Okay.
You don't try those debates in Ghana now.
We'll take a break here. We have some 30 minutes to check out of the studio. When we return, I'll share some of your views. And loads of them have come in, but I'll try and share some of them. And Bright says that it's the party people that are somehow paid to go about and poo-poo some of the things that civil society do serious thinking about and share with the government. But when, for example, in this drone matter, it is the president who decides to make a joke of it and says that, you know, he prefers this to, you know, some are confirmed guinea fowls flying and cannot be accounted for.
Legitimizes the criticism.
Exactly. You know, that's the point. That's the point I'm raising attention to. All right, so we'll take a break. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. So it got so exciting, I thought I had some 30 minutes more. In fact, I have just about 2 minutes more. So 30 seconds each for my guest to share with us what we should take away and what those who are listening now, policy implementers, enforcers of the law, what should happen. Bright Simmons has spoken from a certain perspective, including a cultural, you know, change that we need in this country. I start with Ace. How do you hold Ace to 30 seconds?
Well, I'll do 30 seconds.
Okay.
And I cannot repeat all that Bright said.
Right.
But if you ask, it's the end of the year, maybe I'm supposed to give out a good message. I don't have one. My heart is still broken for this country. I think that the people who are leading, who are trying to lead the discussion on these things are gradually folding up. You know, I feel it myself. You can't speak about an issue because it was done by a political party. And they arrange their trolls to lynch you, literally. And nobody's saying what you said is not the truth. And government officials know where the truth is. but they would keep quiet because either they don't want to be lynched either, or they are benefiting from the social media lynching that is going on. In the process, people are beginning to say, well, then it's probably not worth our while. 2, our system is set up to make you fail where corruption is concerned. If I'm speeding to Takoradi and I'm arrested, why am I not paying a fine immediately? Why do I have to go to court 3 times in Takoradi when I live in Accra to be fined 200 cedis for speeding? Why can't I get a speeding ticket, which I pay immediately, or I know that the next time I'm picked up, I'm heading straight to jail? If we don't fix the system, we cannot fix corruption. So I agree with the preventative thing. That maybe sometimes what we need to do is to fix the system. And the long room, of course, the corruption has gone elsewhere though, but the long room thing shows that this can be done. The attention to detail that Bright talks about, the mismanagement, I think that sometimes it's deliberate. It creates the theft for the smart to steal. And so we begin to fix things like procurement when the whole contract is collusive. But one government uses sole sourcing as illegal collusive contracts, nobody gets punished. Another government will use restrictive tendering to do collusive contracts, and nobody gets punished. We pass the beautiful laws. Our Public Procurement Act is beautiful, but we want to enforce it. That is why and I'll give you one last example. There was a dispute under the Procurement Act whether vehicles were equipment or for the purposes of government disposal, requiring a board or a technical board appraiser. So in June or so, prior to the elections, we amended the law with a lot of civil society and foreign pressure. We amended the law to specifically say that now you can't sell a government vehicle without there having the board inquiry that will assess maybe another government department needs it. No, and it should be sold by auction. After the election, we sold over 300 cars in complete disregard of the law. Nobody's ever going to get punished. So at the end of the day, I have my heart break, and that's my view of 2018.
So from what you have said over the period, it does appear that CDD has a lot more work to do in 2019 and going forward.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I think we just 2018 was our transition year, transition for our from our founding leadership to a new one. And we also took the opportunity to do a new strategy for the next 5 years. So definitely we are going to enter the new year with greater resolve. We are not at all worried about the fact that there is this new emerging climate of hostility to think tanks or to those who play with knowledge and ideas and stuff like that. It's unfortunate, but it's really not going to silence us. We're going to actually even forge closer ties within civil society with our peer organizations, Imani and others, because we don't think that power is knowledge. We do not think that the mere fact that you have an electoral mandate means that you also must have a monopoly of wisdom in this land, and that you are the only one whose voice must be heard.
Right.
So we respect the political class, we respect the division of labor. They have power, fine, but power and knowledge must work together for this country to move forward. So we'll continue to do what we do, and because fundamentally I think that we are squandering a big opportunity as a country. Ghana has a beautiful brand. It's a nice image. The product is terrible. We need to work on the product.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just a short, what would be your last words? 30 seconds.
I just say, I hope in 2019, all of us will show greater commitment to the fight against corruption. I think that the extreme partisanship among the dominant political parties is not helping the fight, and I hope that can be minimized so that we can have a consensus, we can have constructive dialogue, on issues. We can probably have a national priority on a list of priority issues, because we seem to have lost the way in terms of what issues are priority, what is priority among priorities, because we still have situations of schools on the trees, we have situations of communities sharing drinking water with cattle and so on. So many issues.
Terrible.
But I think the political discourse, it's not helping. The extreme partisanship is not helping.
Right.
So
great. Thank you very much. Right. 30 seconds. Yeah.
I would just issue a plea to my fellow citizens that nobody's out for mischief. Nobody has some grand agenda to terrorize your party or to, But the truth is that the triumphalism around political achievements that don't transform the country needs to tone down so that we recognize the deep despair that confronts us if you don't fix certain things rapidly, given population growth and everything else. So yes, you got new regions, but when you realize that the district budget for Jasikan is 5 cedis per person per year,
And it's not going to change with the
and 5.5 cedis for Karachi is per year, and the reason why they feel under hard done in is the fact that they see somebody in Pando getting twice that and somebody in Ho getting 3 times that. That will not be solved by creating a region for them. It will be solved by fundamentally reconfiguring the district assembly's common fund and the way that is designed.
Okay.
When we say those things, we don't want to dampen your enthusiasm.
Okay. Thank you very much. My guests today for the very final edition of Newsfile have been Justice Emil Short, former commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice and former judge, United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Bright Simmons is Honorary Vice President, Imani, Africa, and member, Africa Strategic Group, World Economic Forum. Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director, Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana. Ace Ankoma is a lawyer. Earlier, we had Clara Berry Kasati and also Amanda Clinton, who is both are lawyers. I'm Samson Ladi Ayanini. We say thank you very much, particularly for those who make time to come here to help us shape national discourse. Thank you very much to all of you for spending time with us, and for the millions who continue to keep faith with Newsfile. Thank you. We'll do our best to improve your viewing of the show. My producers and team of technical men, thank you very much, as always. The show is over now. We are going to have a repeat broadcast of the 2018 Science and Maths quiz. So stay tuned in. Don't go anywhere.